To another episode in the series of video interviews for the SCC online blog. I'm Masooma Rizvi and I'll be your host for this session. Today we have with us Mr. Manu Chaturvedi, who has completed his graduation from NUJS Kolkata and has done his LLM in International Legal Studies from the University of California. We also know him from his informational and witty Instagram posts. Currently, he's an independent legal practitioner skilled in legal writing and litigation. The team at EBC SCC Online extends warm greetings to you, sir, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Masooma. Thank you for having me. Thank you, SCC.
Okay, sir, so the first question that I have is that we get a lot of information about the COVID-19 pandemic, the first wave, the second wave from your Instagram posts that are objectively report that the number of cases and the cases that have recovered coupled with a detailed analysis. So in that context, what impact do you think it makes when lawyers and law students are updated with the news generally and more specifically legal news?
Okay. So there's like a few questions in that one question, right? I mean, I started the whole posting business and being slightly more active on social media just as a result of having too much time on my hands, to be very honest. That basically was the founding, notion which allowed me to, I just had time. So I wanted to know what I can do with my time. And the pandemic suddenly just caught us all off guard. So I had no plans whatsoever. And the courts shut down. And if you remember, courts were pretty much shut for the first couple of months. So during that time, usually I avoid social media like the plague, right? At least in 2018-19, I wouldn't really post anything. It was in a public account. The reason I started posting the sort of content I posted, apart from the fact that I had time on my hands, was principally because if you look at, news media, it could be less so print media, but more so what you see on television and increasingly what you see on digital news media as well, although to a lesser extent, is a lot of polarized, binary, black and white, very biased, propaganda-like information. And of course, most of it comes from what we call the right wing or whatever, but it's on both sides, to be very honest, right? And the pandemic was heavily politicized. So when I started looking at the news for the pandemic, because I mean, I'm sure just like me, everybody wanted to know about the pandemic, right? And they wanted some raw data, of course, but they also wanted some unbiased coverage, I'm guessing, or factual descriptions that weren't as readily available as they should be online, right? In fact, I'll rephrase that. They are readily available online in the sense that all of this is online, it's cataloged online, but the way the internet works in terms of how these websites optimize themselves for search results, the way they use clickbait, etc., means that most of this information resides in some corner of the internet, right? And so that's a great test case for what's been happening outside of the pandemic as well, right? Just related to information retrieval online, right? So if you're shaping your opinion, what you want is an unbiased distillation of the facts that are before you. And you want to know what are the known unknowns. You want to know what are the unknown unknowns. Well, you can't know the unknown unknowns, but at least you can know the known unknowns, right? And of course, you will always have 2 points of view. You might have 4, 5, 6 different points of views, depending on what you're discussing. It just tends to be the case that everything passes through a political lens these days. So there are just principally 2 points of views. And then people just sort of land on one or the other side of the fence. And they envision the idea of fence sitters, right, is almost a pejorative right now, no matter the opinion, right? So you could even have an opinion on the vaccines, which could be perceived as fence sitting. It could be anti-vaxxer, or it could be too pro-government because you're into vaccination. So all of that, right? So I was very tired of this sort of discourse that was taking place. And the pandemic was a great test case because it allowed me the time to get into it get into something that I otherwise would avoid, and I would just sort of focus on my work. And you are all going to be lawyers. I'm guessing people who watch this are also going to be lawyers. If there are people who are watching this who are not going to be lawyers, I just want to ask them, what are they doing on the SCC platform? But I mean, that's just a joke. And it's great that you're here. You could be a UPSC aspirant, I'm guessing. But the idea being that it allowed me time to think through these issues, to look at these issues more closely. And that time I wanted to spend somewhat constructively. So the process was that I would get up, I would do about 3-4 hours of reading every day that I anyway do if I'm free. And then was the process of converting that into what I assume to be digestible bites of information. Now, not everyone on the internet agreed, obviously. Some people were just like, why don't you start a newsletter instead of, littering Instagram with text-heavy posts, etc. But that is what I wanted to do. So that's how I came to this, into this whole social media world with COVID-related updates. And so it's quite clear that, I mean, there was a broader principle at play here. It wasn't just about reporting about the pandemic. That just happened to be temporarily the right thing to do because it was happening in that moment. But the larger issue that drove me to it, which actually is the second part of your question, is that people are increasingly, being divided along this false binary that exists, right? On some situations, you will not have a false binary. So it's not like everything is a gray area, right? But a lot of it is exists in this gray zone, right? And I don't like to say, I mean, the gray zone shouldn't be conflated with uncertainty, right? But in the gray zone, there is a lot of information that is, how do you say it? It's not palatable on the internet, right? It doesn't have any sort of currency on the internet. It's not clickbaity and all of those things, but it's relevant information, and it allows you to make up your mind about certain issues. So I'm just a little sick and tired of the way information is being presented to people, the way certain information is being highlighted on the internet, while we also say that the internet is this amazingly democratized platform where everybody gets to post whatever they want, but that's not how it really works. So I think, given that all of us had time during the pandemic, including me, I felt that not really a responsibility, but I had an urge to sort of constructively engage with the problem as I saw it, right? And why does that? What is the impact of that problem? I mean, it's there for all of us to see, right? I've recently been active on Twitter, and I can't believe the sort of it's just a gutter, to be very honest, right? And even the most, and I like to look at the sort of stuff that people usually ignore. So a lot of my friends also, including myself, and I tend to delete those posts at a later point of time. Even on Instagram, I was doing this. I think it's just something in the social media. I call it the agitated state economy. In fact, I don't call it that. I don't remember where I had read that term, but it's an agitated state economy. All of us are in an agitated state, and it's best to keep us in that agitated state, because then that agitated state translates into attention and loyalty towards whatever point of view is being pushed, right? And if you have attention, then you have advertisers. If you have loyalty, then you have politics, right? And in the middle of all of that, our sense-making ability is going for a toss, right? How do we make sense of things? How do we make sense of things that we don't understand? Do we admit to stuff that we don't understand? Instead, what is happening is, even on the most benign stuff, right? So today, Prince Philip has passed away, right? And it's all fun. And I mean, I'm not the sort of person who takes offense to any joke, right? So it's fine to joke about the fact that Prince Philip died at 99, had shared Don Bradman's average or whatever. But it's amazing to see that people will produce 30,000 comments on a thread as inane as that, whereas nobody's talking about, let's say, George Monbiot's latest foray into some climate science. And so that amazes me, and it amazes me that a lot of people who otherwise are very, very outside of the social media are really good to talk to, are people that I look up to for various different, with respect to certain traits. All of them tend to, including myself, tend to be in this agitated state online, and we talk about a lot of stuff that frankly is a waste of time, but it's actually beyond that. It's not just It's not just simply rent-seeking behavior for social, to get some social credit for yourself. There's nothing productive being added. It's actively destructive behavior because there is a huge opportunity cost that's associated with it. A, and B, it's actively destroying the fabric of sense making. So, and it's there for everyone to see, right? I mean, I teach students as well sometimes, and I've taught for an entire year, and you can sort of see it even in the opinions, the political opinions that people share, how sure they are about stuff. I mean, it's impossible to. I mean, I've had students who are convinced that jurisprudence goes one way or another, right? And they're already convinced 1 year of reading jurisprudence, right? So that's speaking to a different problem. That's not simply deciding that, okay, I like this, I don't like that. There is a general malaise that all of us, including myself, are being sort of infected by, which is that we want to be sure of what we are saying, and we don't want it any other way. And everything is presented as a challenge, everything is taken as a challenge, and everything is polemical. So my advice to lawyers is this long circuitous way to answer your question would be not just lawyers. Everyone needs to read. Everyone needs to inform themselves. Everyone needs to collect knowledge. But before all of that, everybody needs to take a long, hard look at the lens that they're looking through while collecting that information, right? And sometimes that information itself over a period of time is distorting how we pick that lens. So it's important to revisit all of that. And it's important, of course, for lawyers, it's most important, I mean, especially if you're a litigator, because the more informed you are, the better you're at conversation and at lawyering,
Yeah. To follow up about social media and sort of these reading skills, social media has become all about these 30-second videos and bite-sized information where nobody is reading the entire article on that, which causes, I think, most of the problems in the longer run, because nobody wants to read everything about a piece but have an opinion that they post in their story first. So I think, do you think that is a problem, especially with like law students and lawyers who need to inculcate a habit of reading more than, say, other professions?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a very good way of framing it. In fact, I didn't look at it like that. I mean, if that's happening, then that's scary, because lawyers do need to read a lot, and if the benchmark for acquiring information and then assimilating it into your own opinion and then spouting that opinion is going to be a 30-second video or a collection of 30-second videos, which is basically a superficial, mostly, there's a saying, an inch deep and a mile wide. Which is, but this is an inch deep and an inch wide. So it's really not much. So, I mean, I hope that is not the extent of the impact that these 30-second videos have on lawyers and or law students. I hope they're able to look at, compartmentalize their profession and what it requires in a more practical way. But I mean, 30-second videos by in and of themselves are not the problem, right? Again, it's the consumption pattern, right? And again, I'm not a behavioralist or whatever they're called, or a psychologist. So I don't know how society responds exactly. What is the science behind, if there is a exact science behind it that we've discovered, and what that science is. But there is something in all of this. I mean, I'm sure some of the usual suspects is clickbait, all of that stuff that I myself have read 1,000 times over, but maybe have not absorbed very well. But some of the stuff is more apparent as to why that exists. But it's just that if you're going to rely only on 30-second videos to get your information, if you're only going to rely on populist channels, which, have good animation and so many pages now on Instagram also. That's one of the reasons I've sort of pulled back also, because I also need to reconsider, apart from the lack of time because courts have reopened. But I'm just seeing that a lot of people look at Instagram as a one-stop shop. So even the stuff that I was doing, right, that's not the end of the conversation. I mean, usually the posts that I make or whatever, I mean, I try to do 2-hour lives, 3-hour lives, and those lives are not meant to be They're meant to be conversational. They're meant to be experimental. They're not meant to teach anyone anything, to be very honest. And I usually say that in all my life. It's for my own stuff. But if you're looking at other content, which is 30 seconds long, it's fine to look at it. I mean, let's say the Bagjan oil leak, right? Now, people wouldn't have known about that oil leak if it wasn't for these 30-second videos, right? It would not have entered our consumption schedule. Because who's going to read it? I mean, usually it's going to be in the third page of the Hindu, unless there is such damage, whatever editorial decisions are taken by legacy media. So firstly, we've gone away from legacy media. To begin with, not a lot of people were invested in legacy media. And now a lot more people are invested in the short format. And so it allows them to pick up on bits and pieces of information that otherwise they would have skipped over. The point is, I mean, what's the lens that we are putting on this? Like, what is the utilitarian value of it, right? So I'm telling you all of this. Now you and I know about the Bagjan oil spill. Now are we going to read up on it further? Or are we instantaneously going to reshare it? And then the minute we reshare it, somebody will comment on our video and then they will say, oh, you're a whatever, you just don't like the powers that be, and that's why you're sharing this. What were you doing 10 years ago when the government was different? Or something like that, some absolutely, shifting of the goalposts to some sort of very, very shallow. And we all get dragged into it. I get dragged into it, right? And the way to not get dragged into it, for instance, is to not reply to the comments, right? But the problem there is, if you don't reply to the comments, then I've learned this off late because of my partner, that your engagement suffers, right? So if you're not engaging, so some of the blame lies at the feet of these social media companies, which have created algorithms, wittingly or unwittingly, which prioritize engagement. And obviously, engagement is going to be higher where people disagree than when they agree. If they agree, they're just going to like that comment and move on, or say, oh, I agree with you, wonderful, what an anomaly on the internet, and just move on, right? But that's not what's happening. So it's the whole ecosystem that is built around that 30-second video, right? To get to that 30 seconds. It's a very intangible ecosystem. Right? We don't see it as that. So every time we refer to social media, like you also, your question was, what about these 30-second videos, right? But that's not it. 30-second videos are fine in and of themselves. What happens on YouTube, right? There are times when I cannot take my eyes off YouTube. I'll start watching one cat video, and like 4 hours later at 4 in the morning, I would have landed up at some hippopotamus doing some sort of dance, right? Why is that happening, right? So again, that's not to say that only these social media companies are to blame. It's just this ecosystem that's built around it. And I think they have, through trial and error, managed to make us an accomplice to that system, where while we might have subconsciously or unconsciously, surrendered our whatever free will or right sensibilities to these companies, but at some point, I think we are also responsible, especially when we become sort of aware of these things, to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to take a break from all of this. I'm going to go back to reading. At least that's what I try to do. So every time I'm absent for like maybe a month or 2 months, what I'm trying to do is, I don't like this terminology of detoxify, digital detox, or whatever it's called. I mean, why the assumption that you need to detox, right? I mean, the digital space is not in and of itself toxic. It's just the amount of time you're spending on it and the opportunity cost, again, of that time you could be spending elsewhere. So do watch these 30-second videos, but I guess people should make a habit of reading a little more. 30-second videos are like abstracts to the essay, to the article, right? So if your entire project in law school is going to be based on an abstract or a series of abstracts, then those are the marks that you'll get. And so that's our response.
Okay, so moving on, you've created this sort of niche for yourself in the kind of legal content that you were creating on social media. So what advice would you like to give law students who are looking to follow a similar trend? When I talk about, I follow your content, and I remember you had done this Instagram live about the Sino-India dispute. So remember? And I have studied it as part of my international relations project and like as my subject. But things you talked about is not necessarily things that I had studied, all those treaties and likes. So when I watched that live, I took down notes because I was also at home, college was also shut. And I'm like, this is legal. This is obviously all these treaties and all are part of international law that I've not seen before. And I personally don't come across a lot of content like that. And I'm sure a lot of people share that similar view. So my question, breaking that down, means there are a lot of law students now who are creating podcasts and who are making these legal update pages in different law schools. So all of these things are happening. So what advice would you give to these children or these, not to infantilize them, like who want to who want to sort of get in that line and, get into social media and to somehow make a name for themselves there?
Got it. So, I mean, this is not mock modesty. What I would say is first principles basis, I think, and this is not something that I'm localizing to lawyers, although lawyers and actors tend to be very narcissistic people, just as a rule of thumb. But I would say that firstly, don't play into this notion of I need to develop a following and therefore I will choose what I have to say at the subject and what you have to say about the subject on that basis, right? And now that's again very generic advice. That doesn't mean you go and find the most sterile, prosaic, and remote issues that have no relevance and you make it your point. I mean, you could make a podcast out of that, maybe just talking about really, really far out stuff. But don't go after stuff like that, because I think just yesterday I read this great article and I think my sense making ability is tainted because of that. I have a bias now. I do feel that all of us, me included, there's this sort of pull, this social media thing that, okay, I have like now whatever 28,000 followers, or what if I have 30,000 followers, whatever. And so a lot of our content, so to speak, is oriented in that manner. So I would say stay away from that. And you have such people, especially if they're lawyers, have a great reason. I mean, they have an alternate career, right? I mean, they can be lawyers and earn their money from that and do this sort of thing on a more pro bono basis. And pro bono doesn't just mean financially, but even when it comes to the attention economy, right? They can excel as lawyers, and maybe the whole art, the whole craft of manipulating the masses and manipulating people can take place in a courtroom. And what they want to put out should be more like an objective analysis, right? So that would be great, and I hope to see that more. I mean, I have a question was to law students, right?
Yeah.
And lawyers. Nothing else, yeah. I mean, in the sense that I myself, I don't consider myself to be very well informed. Again, this is not mock modesty. This is just the truth. Right? There are people I've worked with who I found myself to be smarter than in terms of being prepared for that particular matter, let's say, or I have even found instances where I think I have a better work ethic or moral ethic. I mean, just ethics than the people I've worked with. Similarly, I have found people who I look up to, who excel way more than I do in all of these things. And I have liked some of them and I have not liked some of them, right? Including my work experience, to be very honest. So I really don't want to be presumptuous enough to say that, okay, I am sitting on top of some sort of wisdom mountain and I'm spouting. But yeah, I mean, if people are doing that, it's trial and error. Keep doing what you're doing and let's see what comes out of it. But just try to be as objective as possible. And where you can't be objective, try to sort of engage in a meta-analysis of your own biases and, cognitive dissonance, if you have any, etc. So that's all. Otherwise, do whatever you want to do.
Right. Okay. So moving on from social media now, you have a varied independent practice that ranges from civil to commercial laws, and it extends to environmental law, etc. as well. You're also the standing counsel for the Municipal Corporation of New Delhi, and you also give lectures, like you said, on constitutional law and environmental law, etc. So in this area of hyper specialization, etc., can you tell our readers and viewers how this works?
Right. So just a point of order. I mean, I've done a bunch of environmental law cases. Some of them are continuing even now. I don't lecture on environmental law unless I'm with some aspects of constitutional law. Typically, it's overlap with with matters concerning the exploitation of national security, or just the exploitation of human rights under the garb of national security, etc. I've been interested in for a very long time. So there is that on one end, and there is, of course, I represent the government also on the other end, and that's sort of the liberty that you can actually enjoy as a lawyer, right? At least up to a certain point, and let's leave it at that. That's for everyone to decide what that point is, right? And people are taking positions along the spectrum. So there's that one point of order that I have taught legal drafting and litigation strategies in law schools, and I have maybe given a couple of lectures here and there on constitutional law. In terms of the age of hyper specialization, that age has always been coming, right? I mean, when I was in law school, there were people doing company secretaryships and there were people doing XYZ. I never did them. And to be very honest, this is not to diss them at all, because a lot of those people I see today, and they're in very, very specialized roles, and they're doing very well for themselves, both financially as well as in terms of, emotionally, they're in a good place. The burnout rate is quite high, but whatever, that's even in my profession, right? So not to diss on that, but it was just something that I wasn't cut out for me, right? I mean, just as a journey, to be very honest with you, to be quite frank, I didn't want to be a lawyer up till maybe the third or fourth, even fifth year of my law school. In fact, I wanted to be a lawyer when I got into law school, and progressively lost interest. And that's not, it's principally, I take responsibility for that, right? So when I did get out of law school, I was a little, scattershot in what I want to do next. And I ended up taking a law researcher's position with a high court judge. And that was the first time that for an extended period of time, I was able to sit in a courtroom and actually watch it as if it was, fly on the wall sort of thing. And that is where my interest grew. I found it to be in equal parts an extremely bureaucratic enterprise, right? With all the failings of bureaucracy, delays, excessive formalism, excessive, what I find to be excessive reliance on the majesty of law, etc., etc. And they all serve their purpose on the one hand. And on the other hand, I found it to be a very dynamic profession. I like the idea of waiting outside for your matter, and I could just imagine myself trying to argue my first matter, and you do get butterflies in your stomach, and you tend to keep doing that throughout your life, right? And it's just a little more, it was more suited to my personality. So that's how I got with the law, right? And I realized that, and I went to work for a couple of firms that I would stand next to a printing machine or a fax machine, and I said, I would never going to do this, right? I don't want to go back to my table. I don't have a problem standing in some non-air conditioned alleyway in the Supreme Court getting my photocopies, but I'm not going to work in an office in a desk job. So I didn't want to do a desk job, although a lot of litigation is desk job, maybe 90% of it. But that 10% makes up for it. Once I decided I wanted to litigate, I have no lawyers in my family, right? And I hadn't gone down the path of first going and working for a firm, specializing in one area of law, whatever. A lot of people will do electricity litigation, right? They'll be in the litigation team, primarily handling electricity matters. So a lot of my peers did all of that. And I was very consciously aware of the fact that they were doing this. And I've actually thought about it and become really anxious. There have been moments or phases in my past where I've thought, oh my God, what am I doing? Why am I just working as a generalist? And so I went to work for a couple of seniors, and had very short stints with them. Learned a lot from my colleagues in those, for instance, my seniors who were assisting me in those offices. And so I just stuck through, right? And it was more of there's more of a let's see where this goes. And sometimes when you don't have enough opportunities, right? Because I don't have any lawyers in my family, they're all doctors and army people.
Right.
It sort of can work out in a way it's not like you're going to make it work for yourself. It just sometimes does, lots of doors close and only one door is open. So that's the only door you can go through. So basically, a lot of doors kept shutting and I just kept walking through the doors that were open for me, right? And invariably, what I ended up doing was I started with a lot of service law and environmental litigation, because environmental litigation anyone can do, right? You don't need a client for it. So environmental litigation, some right to information work I did working with a couple of organizations. And then gradually, because I was from a bureaucratic background, some uncle would come and say, oh, here is some person who needs assistance on some service law matter. Service law is nothing I understood. So I remember I got like Sarkari pension regulations in a huge Sarkari box, right, put in my office, that I still have those regulations for just 3 matters. And that was my first experience with litigating on my own. And so that happened. And then I did well in a couple of matters. And then one thing led to another, somebody said something to someone else. And so I sort of expanded outwards. The environmental litigation part, as I said, was principally a function of you don't need a client. You can just simply, anybody will become your client if you do it for free, right? So it was basically a function of that. And then slowly one thing led to another. And then I got a couple of, clients which pay well, which pay on time. And then made my way up through the counsel positions, union and MCD. And I ended up becoming standing counsel for the MCD. And then a big matter falls in your lap, because it doesn't end there, right? And there's a lot of politics, unsaid stuff that we should not get into really. And so then it's luck also. You get some big matter, then you work really hard on it. And if it pays off, then it pays off. And so a couple of those occasions in my life where stuff sort of paid off. And I'm hoping stuff will continue to pay off in the future. So there's a long way to go.
God willing.
That's how I got into the whole thing. Yes, God willing. But there are other paths. To be very sure, there are other paths. And they're probably, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off and I'm going on a little bit, but this is important, right? So it's not like you have to be a generalist. It comes with its own struggles for sure. But that's the path I chose, and it seems to be sort of working along just about fine. And but if people have other modes of doing it, like so many of my peers, there are 100 models, right, to litigation. Some come through all sorts of ways. So I don't know which one is better than which, but it helps to sort of commit at least for a period of time, maybe 1, 2, 3 years. Give yourself some time. Yeah.
So with that being said, are there any areas that you find yourself most gravitated towards, even when you practice as a generalized lawyer?
Yeah, so strangely enough, I'm very interested in competition law now. Over the last year or so, last couple of years, I started to do some competition law matters. So I'm looking at competition. And if you ask me 5 years ago even, if I had any interest in competition law, I would say no. Right. I didn't even 8 years ago, I didn't know the distinction. I didn't know that there was no distinction between antitrust and competition law. So not a very smart cookie you have here being interviewed. But I sort of did my LLM and I audited a couple of classes on competition law. Some of it was part of my comparative jurisprudence, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a new area of law. It's an emergent area of law still. It's not new because antitrust goes a long way back. But it's sort of affected by the digitization of businesses and generally the ecosystem, generally speaking. So I found it very interesting, and that's what I am now really, really excited about. I'm excited enough that I've ordered a lot of commentaries, and I do read them. Really heavy commentaries, just sitting and just reading them, even when there's no matter. That's a good yardstick for interest.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, research, I believe, is required at every stage, be it for content creation or academic writing. So in this context, what does exhaustion of research mean to you?
Very interesting question, actually. When does one feel that they have exhaustively finished research? Ideally, I mean, it's a cheesy answer and it's a stereotype. I mean, in the sense, ideally never, right? But what does that imply? I mean, you can't just say, okay, I'm not done researching. But I would say, I mean, it really depends, right? So maybe it's better to explain through an example. Let's take that Sino-Indian border dispute for example, right? So because it presents a sort of a neat parameterized bunch of information that you can explore. Right. So when I started off doing that, I wanted to cover the history of the Indo-China border dispute, going all the way back to like how many hundreds of years I went back. Right. And so I was just reading it as if I was trying to construct a story in my head. How does one go back 500-600 years and then start constructing all of this? So basically you start there and then I read and I read and I read and I realized that there were aspects. So what I tend to do with most of stuff that I try to discuss online is I tend to draw an artificial boundary by myself, right? Now that's not a luxury that can be afforded in many things, right? You can't do that in philosophy, for instance. I mean, you can if you are more of a subscriber model engagement with philosophy, where you say, okay, I enjoy this particular philosophy and that works for me, and I'm just going to stop there, right? Which is how religion works, incidentally. But if you're a philosophy student, you can't end your inquiry like that. So that said, with most things in life, you can set an artificial boundary. You can say, okay, I'm going to now. This is enough information for me because I've spent so much time. Again, the context of it, right? Now I have 10 hours in a day, let's say during the pandemic, but I just have one now, right? So what can I fit into that 1 hour? And so I'll get to a point and then I will ideally try to do some reading about, try to get a sense of how large is the unknown area that I haven't explored, right? And once I have some idea of that, right? Then maybe what I want to do is I want to approach my narrative that I'm going to put out with a degree of modesty, right? And make it explicit that, okay, look, I have done this and I am sure of this. I am not so sure of this, even though I've read it. And this is the stuff that I haven't looked at at all. So that really helps. So again, I've reframed your question in terms of exhaustive research. Your question was more of when do you stop researching, right? I mean, if it was left up to me, if the topic was of interest, I would keep reading about it, right? But it's not a function of that, right? It's a function of, are you going to platform that research into a paper, into a social media post, into a draft before a court? And so then you'll have to, look at it differently in each instance. Are you just absorbing it for yourself? How much time do you have? Etc. So again, the best thing to do is, unless you're in court, try to imbue the narrative that you're putting out with a degree of modesty and humility, and acknowledging that you don't know certain things, you didn't have time for certain things. In court, unfortunately, that's not the best strategy. In which case, you should take enough time out to research properly all the propositions that you have.
Yeah. Okay. So coming to the last question, again about the pandemic, it's that I'd like to ask you about the impact of this continuing pandemic on the legal profession, and following up with that, about virtual hearings. Do you think they're the inevitable future?
I hope they are the inevitable future. I hope, like I've never hoped for pretty much anything in the professional space. Because, see, there are two aspects to it, right? I mean, it's no secret that a lot of bar associations have been opposing, or bar councils have been opposing the idea of virtual hearings, for the simple reason that the lawyers which have already cornered the markets for whatever reason in litigation will actually make the foray into other markets, right? So if there's a great senior counsel sitting in Delhi, I mean, the most famous example that's given, I don't know why, is always of Mr. Salve. And they always say, oh, he's sitting in London, but he's attending every court, and where is the opportunity for all of us? Well, okay, fair enough. I get that point of view, because it's not as simple as, okay, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just go with it, because that's not how life works. I mean, you need to have a degree of responsibility, of course, but we also need to acknowledge that there are blind spots and inefficiencies in the system and even deliberate designs in the system that perpetuate the cornering of markets, right? So there needs to be some sort of either some sort of organic regulation, which is something that we see with physical hearings, because one senior counsel, or for that matter, even not a senior counsel, a junior counsel who's good or who's cornered something cannot possibly be present in 4 different jurisdictions, right? Or even in the same jurisdiction, 2 different courts on the same day. And so there's more of the pie for everyone, just as a function of people not having enough time to be in 2 places at one time. And what online tends to do is it does away with that boundary problem. And so there are some problems with it, but it saves too much time. Right? It's great. I mean, one of my pet peeves, and this is going to sound sort of contradictory because I said it's a dynamic profession and you're not doing a desk job. You know, something you associate with desk job, apart from the fact that it can be very boring, etc., is also the fact that you can get a lot accomplished sitting. I mean, well, not really. I mean, there's also that stereotype of people just sitting in offices all day long. But in the sense that in courts, usually my pet peeve has always been, while it's a social profession, ours, it's not like being a doctor. It's not a science. It's not a hard science. It's basically about convincing the judge. It's about making connections with the bar and, networking generally. But I just find it to be in Delhi traffic, in whatever Mumbai traffic or wherever you're sitting, having to attend 4 different courts, leaving at 8 in the morning just for 1 hearing or maybe 3 matters, and then waiting all the way till 3, 4, 5, and then coming back to office and then working all the way up till 12, 1. It not only ruins, it ruins just the work-life balance in a way for everyone, right? And usually it's, the benefits that accrue in our ecosystem are usually trickle down. So all the benefits are taken by the people who are who are anyway in a great position, and it trickles down to the so-called have-nots even in our profession. So those could be juniors or could be interns, but the burdens are usually taken mostly the other way around, right? So if somebody has to sit at 2 in the morning and do drafting, it will be the most junior most lawyer there will be paid the least, etc. So I principally don't agree with that at all. I just hate that system. So, but you can't change that system so easily, right? But what you can do is you can introduce a variable or change a variable in that system, which allows everyone to have more time, which is like online hearings, right? So I can just sit here, and I have done it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of online hearings, right? In fact, Justice Mukta Gupta's court, I was present in Justice Mukta Gupta's court for a very, very small matter. It was a physical hearing matter. And I don't know why it came out in the physical roster. And she asked me, how are you liking this? At that time, the whole association and councils. And I said, I love it, and I love the fact that I'm in the Delhi High Court, and it's basically like some European court. There's no traffic. I can just get here. And if I want to physically argue, I don't have to wait too long for my matter. I just argue and I go back. So that hybrid system is also great. And the virtual system is spectacular because it saves a lot of time. I can just, do a lot of prep work early in the morning from the comfort of my office or from my home. And as long as I am paying, as long as I'm respectful of some of the things, so I don't particularly enjoy, although I have no problem with it, but I think people shouldn't be sitting in their cars and arguing, right? But that again is a function of privilege. Right? You can't expect some small, not small lawyer, but, someone who is economically not as well off as other lawyers to not sit and operate from their kitchen. They'll have 5 people in their houses. They might not have an office. So I think we need to make those, we need to walk that line a little finely. But otherwise, if you're respectful and if you're prepared and you conduct yourself in a manner that's befitting of any professional space, then virtual hearings are great because I can just wrap up in 10 minutes. I can choose to engage right at that moment. I'm not having to drive a couple of hours. I'm not having to wait a couple of hours. I'll just join. I argue my matter. I get out. My junior colleague submits my appearance, and that's the end of it. And then we move on to whatever is the next task of the day. And I virtual system, but it comes with all of these issues, right? Issues of access for older lawyers, issues of access for lawyers sitting in remote places. The issues that we highlighted with respect to cornering of markets, the debate around what is the modality and how do you maintain decorum online, etc. So it comes with all of those caveats, and we definitely need to figure those out, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, It's only stuff like this, whatever that adage is, that again, that cliche, that, what is it called? Crisis breeds opportunity or whatever. And so this is a great opportunity to switch over to the virtual mode. And it's just, outrightly, I will sign any petition that says that you should keep a future where, for instance, legal services are cheaper because lawyers don't have to travel so much, right? Where education is cheaper on an option basis. So let's say I just want to attend online classes where classes are being rendered physically, right? And so maybe because I don't utilize the campus so much, maybe my fees can be subsidized. If nothing, then at least I don't have to pay for traveling and lodging if I have to stay outside of this campus. So I think the idea being that it's not one preferred over the other, it's some sort of blend which takes care of all of these. Excessive rulemaking is a huge problem in India. So I don't want to lean towards everything being extremely regulated, especially anything to do with government or the bureaucracy of the judiciary, etc. But I think we can work it out, and I think it's a great option to have. Why not? It's always helpful, though. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first part of the question. The impact of this continuing pandemic. What do you think it will be on the legal profession in the longer run?
Well, firstly, we need to know how long this pandemic will go on to really get a sense of the longer run, right? Again, courts are again shutting down. There's a Delhi High Court notification yesterday. So I'm not sure, but you're seeing a lot of the effects already, right? You're seeing a lot of people, young lawyers, including myself, who were on a certain trajectory or who wanted to be on a certain trajectory, and suddenly the pandemic is hit. And 2 years is a long time, right? For all, one can imagine this will go on for two years, I guess, right? Or a year and a half at best. It's a long time. So you're seeing some of the more obvious effects, that work is drying up for a lot of lawyers, which is a big problem. Apart from that, I hope that we're going to use this as an opportunity to have that virtual system figure out, iron out our differences and move ahead with that system. Apart from that, I'll have to think about what other effects could. One is definitely the economic effect. I don't think it's, there's going to be a lot of litigation around bankruptcy and a lot of other contractual issues that are going to come up. So there's also that side of it, where if you're looking at very practically, you should be looking for clients already. So that's right. I don't want to make light of anyone's problems, though, because there are lawyers out there who are going through a lot of hardship. And I'm not usually a politically correct person, but I do feel deeply that a lot of young lawyers and a lot of lawyers who might not be young, but might just be living, not hand to mouth, but just sustaining, don't have the kind of money to keep their offices rented out, to keep their subscriptions going. Subscriptions are expensive. They're almost 1 lakh, right? Each subscription. So there are all those issues, definitely. Some people have to let go of their juniors, and I'm sure those juniors are very massively affected. So there is a huge problem. And again, it's a test of the fraternity, isn't it? We tend to speak of ourselves as a fraternity. We tend to, have these romanticized notions of helping each other as brothers in arms or folks in arms or what have you. But the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. So let's see how far people go with assisting each other. I, for one, have tried not to decrease anyone's salary or negotiate that salary, but that's because I probably don't pay enough anyway. You never know. So, but yeah, we all have to reflect on how we can in these times carry on as we were carrying on before, and we all have to decide who has more of the pie to share at this point of time. But that's very counterintuitive for lawyers.
So with that, I would like to thank you for your time and wrap this interview up. Thanks again for agreeing to speak with us. And this is a great interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Masooma. Thank you so much.